Hi, everybody. Buenos tardes. I just made the executive decision that we're going to do this entire thing in Spanish. You guys are good with that, right? We're all good with that?
Sí.
Yeah.
Sí.
Porque en El Salvador hablamos español, ¿sí? ¿Está bien?
Ándale pues.
Hey, that joke backfired on me because that's all the Spanish I know. So my name is David Branscombe. I am I'm participating, I guess, but also going to kind of be guiding this discussion here a little bit. So I will go last. I'd like everybody to just kind of introduce yourself, the company you work with, your projects, kind of what you're focused on, that sort of thing. And we will start here with Luke.
I'm Luke Dasher. I've been working on Bitcoin since 2011. Started one of the earliest mining pools, wrote a lot of the firmware and software behind mining. Recently relaunched my mining pool as Ocean Mining last year. Been doing other Bitcoin development as well throughout the years.
Luke, real quick, can you tell me what your t-shirt is? Let them know what your t-shirt is.
This is one of the blocks mined by Ocean last year. The blue represents the transactions that would have been found by any miner. The green at the top here is the transactions that Ocean found that other mining pools would not have found because of the ongoing Ordinals attack.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. It's fun to watch on their website, by the way. You can actually see, it's kind of like watching the mempool, right? But it's fun. Anyway.
So I'm Gerald Wilkie. I'm the president and founder of HM Tech. Started into Bitcoin back in 2012. I just want to take a moment to say it's kind of cool to be on stage with Luke Dasher. I'm a little bit of a fanboy right now, so glad to be here with you.
Stay calm.
I'm
Stay
trying.
calm.
It's really hard.
Stay cool, bro.
So we do hosting as well as ASIC repair. We currently represent the largest ASIC repair facility in North America. And I am super proud to say that we're coming to El Salvador this year. So we'll spend here in Latin America. I'm very excited about that to help support the Salvadorian, desire and goal of becoming Bitcoin miners and being self-sufficient here.
Justin Orkney, background in electric utilities, and I was with one of the largest electric utilities when I discovered Bitcoin mining as this incredible opportunity for a flexible load resource and to accomplish everything we were trying to accomplish with controlling people's thermostats and car charging and all that other, what I consider nonsense now at this point. And so now I'm with Standard Power, building out large energy infrastructure for hosting miners. We have 2 big projects in Ohio, got an eye towards nuclear generation, and still consulting with some utilities on this, and they're getting there.
Very nice. And you work with Max Scherzen, right? That's
yeah.
it?
Yep.
And it's Coshocton? Is that the main location?
Yeah. Eastern Ohio. We took over an old paper mill in Coshocton, built out about 40 megawatts there. And then we have about 15 minutes down the road and what's now a completely demolished and removed coal plant. But we took over the interconnection, which is actually up to 1.2 gigawatts. So we're not there yet with the capacity that we have, but we're building out to it. So
very nice. Is that the one? So that's the one that's actually going to be nuclear. You just basically need that infrastructure, right, for the nuclear? Yeah.
The hope is that in 5 years or so, we're able to get started on a small modular reactor there to replace some of the generation.
Very cool. Very cool. Thanks, Justin. My name is David Branscombe. I go by @DavidBranscombe on Twitter. I'm completely doxxed. I also go by Rebel Mining in Texas. Previously was chief commercial officer for a couple companies, one of which was Rebel Mining. I started out on immersion cooling, designing and implementing immersion cooling for Bitcoin miners so they could overclock their miners, reduce their capital expenditure when they're buying. If you're overclocking, you don't need as many miners to take advantage of the power, right? It's just a mathematical equation at that point. Was a consultant, independent consultant, built a few different mines, commercial officer where I negotiated contracts with miners for hosting, sourcing energy on grid, and then kept slowly working my way back to upstream up to the energy power source. And then when we all got, well, a bunch of us got letters from the Energy Information Administration a few months ago, it just kind of solidified the idea that we need to be behind the meter. We need to look for new opportunities. Be as close to that power generation, really as vertical as possible, right? As sovereign as possible. So my latest company is Vea Energy. Website is vea.energy. We're looking at off-grid gas site mining almost solely. And then also doing some, Justin and I kind of geeked out a little bit yesterday. We're actually doing some green energy, renewable energy, waste to energy products for methane mitigation, biodigestion, things like that. We can talk a little bit about that later. But that's kind of my background as well. So we're trying to find what I think is so impressive about Bitcoin, right? Is its efficiency. We in whatever aspect it is, whether it's sats for byte, whether it's the network and the security, whether it's block size, where we always, all those big fights are all about what's the most efficient way to do what we're trying to accomplish, right? We look for those opportunities, right? We find these inefficiencies in these legacy industries, right? And we fit in places that no one else will fit, right? We're solving these interesting problems. So let's start with Luke. As far as just Bitcoin, maybe even holistically, right? Like, what do you feel is the biggest challenge in the world today, right? That Bitcoin actually helps solve? And you can be as specific or as broad macro as you'd like.
Probably just in general, the collapse of the fiat currencies.
Mm-hmm.
If we didn't have Bitcoin, the world wouldn't be in a very good place. It still isn't, but Bitcoin helps significantly in mitigating that.
What do you think is, obviously, when you start kind of digging in and studying, Bitcoin as a whole, you just look at a problem in the world and it almost ultimately ends follow the money, right? It almost always goes back to the fiat system in some way, shape, or form. What do you feel is one of those problems that it's kind of just may not have been as obvious initially, right? But then all of a sudden, Bitcoin came on the scene and it clicked. Anything in specifically?
Probably mainly inflation.
Yeah.
It wasn't so much of a problem when Bitcoin launched, but it's in the last 3-4 years, it's gone completely crazy.
Yeah. What is it, like 35% added to the money supply in like the last 4 or 5, since 2020, 2019, something like that?
I'm pretty sure it's more than doubled, hasn't it?
Is it? Yeah.
So I'll take that from an area of expertise that I have, which is the electric grid. So when we talk about the United States, we've got a aging and an ailing power grid. We hear these stories about places like California and New York that have blackouts when the grid's under extreme strain, which you would think that you wouldn't have from the wealthiest country in the world, but we haven't been taking care of our own house. So Bitcoin actually fixes this. So what power companies don't have is the ability to generate beyond a maximum demand. So let's say, we'll just use like small numbers to make it easy. If you've got a power company that generates a gigawatt of power at its absolute peak, and during extreme situations, there may be a demand for 1.5 gigawatts. Well, how do you fix that? How do you make sure that you have a curtailable or an interruptible load? And when you have Bitcoin miners that are online, you have a minimum demand. Maybe there's only using, a third or a half of that. Well, the Bitcoin miners come in and stabilize by mining and using the excess power that isn't currently demanded. And when the demand ramps up, the Bitcoin miners receive an information alert from the power utility saying, hey, you guys need to shut down. We shut down, give that power back to the grid and eliminate the blackout situation, the rolling blackouts. So electrification is one thing. And then on, the philanthropic side, same topic though. You've got several groups that are working over in areas, impoverished areas around the world. Africa specifically right now is kind of the hot spot where we're building generation assets. And I say we as a Bitcoin community, where they're building these electrical assets in exchange for the ability to mine there. But subsequently, we're also providing power to folks who have never even had electricity.
Right. Is that gridless is one of the big ones on that one?
Ethiopia, Kenya.
Yeah.
There's several different projects that are going on simultaneously where we're all doing the same good work.
Right.
So there's, so many things that Bitcoin solves and, bringing hope to folks via, a modernized system is one of those things that, it's the coolest industry to be a part of.
Yeah. Justin, I'm going to hijack yours a little bit, right? I want you to kind of build on what he said, right? Because I know that's your background. So explain kind of at a very high level, right, what that load balancing means and what it looks like, right? Because he went into it a little bit, right? But for someone that's kind of new, right, can you just kind of elementarily kind of explain why that's important?
Yeah, but first, I just like to say,
or hijack it back and do whatever you want. Is what I meant to say. Do whatever you want.
I'll get there, but I skipped over. I wanted to make sure that everybody knew that I won the bet, Dave. We were wondering. I want to thank you all for coming out.
No. I had the
we
over.
Didn't know what the over-under was going to be for people attending this. Dave is very cynical. He said 7. I took the over.
To be fair, I said 21. No, because that's my favorite number. But
yeah,
But you didn't know I was going to retweet it.
I didn't know. Once Luke said he was going to talk, I knew I was screwed. I was losing the bet. I'm losing the bet. Yep.
Little dynamics there. So I think that Bitcoin and energy is going. I mean, personal property rights are incredible, and probably the main problem that Bitcoin is solving. But energy and Bitcoin mining is just going to keep becoming more and more profound. So Gerald was mentioning how it can benefit the grid by giving electric service providers, electric utilities, the opportunity to maybe overbuild capacity that's not just sitting there wasted 99% of the time, waiting for the few hours of the year when everyone's turning on their heater and their hot water heater and now charging their car or their air conditioner at the same time. And then thank goodness now the utility planned out for that, and they have the capacity available throughout the system, the generation, the transmission, the distribution to provide reliable electricity, and you don't end up in the situation where the utility is asking people to turn off their thermostats or to not charge their cars or to just, sorry, you're going to have a blackout. So Bitcoin mining is incredible in that regard, but also just in terms of the new types of generation that we've been seeing on the system, particularly solar and wind. I am not a fan, but I'll try to keep it clean. The grid, after the last decade and a half, 2 decades of just saturation with intermittent, unreliable, and arbitrary generation produced by solar and wind, it's really made it a much more complicated endeavor to maintain the balance. And the balance is that at any moment, generation has to be matched with the consumption of the customers on the system. And so we used to have control over the generation, and you could turn the dial up or down to match the load curves of the customers on the system. We don't have that anymore. It's totally gone. And so now we need more flexible load than ever. That's why I was recruited across the country to work with this utility to focus on convincing customers to give us control of their end uses of electricity so that we could help balance the system. And then that's, like I said, when I came across Bitcoin mining. And at this point, I think we're entering the stage. I think Texas has already kind of proved it. It's not a nice to have. It's not an interesting idea. It's a must have for electric utilities, certainly ones that have a significant amount of solar and wind on their system. They recognize the imperative for having reliable, flexible load that they can count on as an energy resource. And I'll tell you what, right now, thermostats don't cut it. And they only want to control your thermostats in the hottest and coldest times of the year. All right. So that's always been a bad idea. But Bitcoin mining doesn't care. It can show up. It can turn off instantaneously. It can stay off for an hour. It can stay off for a weekend. And then it can turn right back on. And I think that the power of Bitcoin mining as an energy resource on electric grids primarily is going to be profound. And then especially once we start pairing it with nuclear.
Right.
You know, nuclear has always been thought of a base load because it just wants to hum at the same level. And so you always wanted to, you couldn't have it adjust to customers using more, using less. And so you had to have it sized at a level of consumption by your customers where they were never going to use less than that. But now you can kind of invert it with nuclear and say, we just have nuclear at the top, and Bitcoin mining now soaks up everything underneath it that the customer load isn't using. And I think people haven't quite started to recognize that, and they still think of nuclear as like a base load, and we're going to need these other types of resources to flex for customer demand. But I think in the future, we're going to see nuclear as just, there is no second best when you pair it with Bitcoin mining.
Yeah. So let's kind of,
LinkedIn started to pick up already.
Yeah.
In Texas, we're seeing it already.
Yeah. So it's like, so let's kind of take this very simply, right? Anytime you have power generation, you design it and you generate the power. And that is what it is, right? It's the same way Bitcoin works. It's physics, it's mathematics, right? So if I need, in the worst case scenario for my town, I need 10 megawatts of my small town, I need 10 megawatts of power, right? I have to have that available when I need it, right? So I may be running or build the infrastructure for 10 megawatts of power, but I only need that, like in Texas, maybe 3 months out of the year in the summer, maybe 1 month in the winter, right? Is when I'm going to be at that max load. So what happens is they produce the energy and they literally just let it go. Like in some cases, you'll lose a large portion of it just through heat, right? It just disappears. Or they have to shut down and ramp down, right? But when they do that in an emergency and they need it back, they have to ramp it back up. Well, all of that costs time, money. We have peaker plants, right, that would just come online last minute when you needed it. These people would just sit there doing nothing. But then when it comes up, they would make a ton of money, right? They would make a ridiculous amount of money because the value of that electricity was so high at that point, right? The power. Bitcoin miners are like a sponge. Battery is not really the right term. It's really a sponge. What we're doing is taking all that excess power and we will use it, right, to create a financial system, to create the next financial backbone, in my opinion, the next global financial backbone, giving that power value that was normally lost. Right. And then at any given time, because of decentralization, right, because of the security of the network and the way that it's been engineered, at any given time, we can turn that off. Right. We shut it off. Like I think Justin said, we get a letter or an email, right, that says, hey, this is the price you're going to pay.
You get an immediate signal through an API. Yeah. It happens in seconds.
Yeah. It's instantaneous, right? So these miners, especially in Texas, are programmed to where when that happens, they automatically, crazy innovation in electrical engineering, right? Throttling power, not just having to turn off and turn back on and flip a switch, right? But we're getting very good at managing that power in a way that no other industry really manages power. Right? This is an amazing thing that we're solving here, finding those inefficiencies. So it's important to understand as a miner on the hardware side, right? When your transaction is going through, whether it's, layer 1 or even Lightning, whatever, custodial, whatever the case may be, that hash power in the background, right, is not just helping you transfer value from one place to another, right? It's actually helping to balance energy and energy consumption all across the planet all at the same time. It's kind of amazing. Speaking of decentralization, right? So there's kind of 4 pieces to mining. We obviously have energy and power. We have the infrastructure, the hardware, things like that. We've got the power generation, whether you want to own that, in my case, right? And then we also have the actual mining, right? Which is very clearly what Luke is that's his forte, right? So talk to me a little bit about like what Ocean is doing, but specifically from like a decentralization standpoint, right? Why is what you guys are doing so important to the health of the network globally?
Well, right now the situation with Bitcoin is that the miners all connect to a mining pool, and the mining pool is the one that actually does the mining. The miners are just hashing and consuming the power. The pool is creating the blocks, deciding what transactions go in the blocks, sending those block templates, so to speak, out to all the individual hashers who are then trying to find that block as designed by the mining pool. the hashers today don't even know what block they're trying to find. They're just searching for it blind. So what we're trying to do with Ocean is we want to move it so that the miners are, again, running their own full node. They're making the blocks. And we're just coordinating between the miners how the rewards get split up. And that way, instead of right now, there's like 2 to 4 entities that are creating 99% of the blocks on Bitcoin and deciding everything that goes in Bitcoin's blockchain. By moving this back to the miners, we have thousands, potentially tens of thousands of different people making the blocks. And by doing this, Bitcoin can restore its property of censorship resistance. The reason being that censorship resistance works not by telling miners you must include every single transaction on the network. That's not even possible. But if your transaction isn't included by miner number 1, miner number 2 or 1048 might include that transaction instead. It's not by telling miners what to do, but by having so many miners that the only way your transaction won't get confirmed is if everybody agrees that it's just an attack on the network.
So to be clear, and I want to clarify this because there's a lot of buzz on Twitter, is the nice way of saying it, right, about Ocean and the options you give to miners and things like that. It's, in my understanding, it's really not necessarily about blocking a specific type of transaction, right, but really just giving them the choice. Like there are multiple templates. Is that correct?
Yes. Right now, miners have 3 different options or different ways to build their blocks with Ocean.
Right.
The goal that we're set out for is to have it so that the miners are running their full nodes and they're making the blocks themselves. So there could be, for every miner that is using Ocean, they can be making the blocks a completely different way on their own.
Right. You're just putting the choice back in their hands.
Where it belongs.
Very good. So what else do we see in the future? This is obviously on the mining side, but I like the actual hash rate side, right? But what else do we see from an infrastructure standpoint? Talk more a little bit about what's happening off grid, all of those micro hydro grids, talk a little bit more about that infrastructure and why, from a hardware standpoint, that's even possible.
Yeah, so we're starting to see a lot of the behind the meter craze picking up pace. Because what we're seeing in MISO or the northern central U.S., Duke Energy in the southeast, New York State in the northeast as well, we're seeing power increases across the board. So not just Bitcoin miners, although legacy media loves to blame us. It's like, oh, Bitcoin came in, my power bill went up 50%.
Boiling the oceans. We're boiling the oceans.
Right.
Let's do it.
So what we're seeing is as these guys are starting to jack up prices across the board, I think in the Southeast, we've seen 35 to 36% over the last 2 years. And Duke Energy just reported that they're going to need another 89% increase between now and 2030. So obviously for Bitcoin mining, that doesn't work. We can't operate with these crazy rates that they're talking about. So behind the meter is a fantastic idea. So if I am an entrepreneur, if I am handy, right, I'm going to take assets that exist, like hydro dams. There are thousands of hydro dams across the United States that are defunct. Folks are buying these up, refurbishing, and creating 1, 2, 5, even sometimes 10 megawatt facilities, Bitcoin mining, and then when necessary, curtailing their Bitcoin miners to give power back to the grid. That story just... we talk about it a lot in our circles, but it's hard not to because it's so impactful. Because even as it stands today, if Bitcoin miners didn't curtail, we would probably see blackouts, rolling blackouts, different cities. I would say anywhere from 6 to 10 times a year. Texas is a fantastic example where we gave over 1,000 megawatts back during the last big snowstorm. The grid would have collapsed if we didn't do that.
And if you haven't seen the hydro plants, our website, ocean.xyz/event, which was our launch event, we have a video basically demonstrating what one of these looks like, how it operates, and how it starts up.
Yeah, which is fantastic. The other cool thing is that we're getting to the point where mining hardware via different additional software add-ons can be pretty self-sufficient. So if any of you guys have ever experienced Bitcoin mining with air-cooled units, it's pretty tough. So there's constant reboots, there's dust, there's dirt, there's humidity, there's all this shit that gets in there that breaks your miner. Yeah, there's noise complaints from neighbors. And there's been a beginning of a transition to water-cooled or hydro miners, MicroBT leading the charge on that. And the hydro miners are fantastic. They are literally, they have water-cooled steel plates on top of them, and there's no airflow through the miner. So when these things hook up, and let's say you have a hydro dam project, and you put in these hydro-cooled miners along with your hydro-powered dam, and you run the software, we'll just say Foreman. Foreman is the most prolific software out there, and those guys do a great job. But you can literally completely automate the process. You might need one guy.
Yep.
So you could have a 5 meg site that automatically looks at not only the power grid and the demand and real-time power prices and decides when to mine and when not to. The miners literally don't shut off, and they don't need attention anymore because they're so stable. It's wild.
Yep.
They don't need maintenance at all?
Very rarely.
So this is where I came into the industry. I came in through immersion cooling, right?
Yeah.
And we were trying to solve that problem. So between hydro and immersion, both, right? There's tons of there's a few cons. We're mostly pros, right? But so to give you an idea, right? You see the ASICs, stacked on shelves, and you see the fans, right? Those fans are additional power draw. Right. And so in traditional data centers, we have something called PUE, which just measures how much power it takes to cool. So if you have a 1.3 PUE, for every 1 megawatt, it takes 300 kilowatts to cool it. Right. When you move to immersion, hydro is just like a radiator, but it takes the water almost right to the chip instead of having those big silver heat sinks in the middle for the air, right? We leave the heat sinks on in immersion, but immersion uses a dielectric fluid. Again, we remove the fans, and the fluid comes in cool at the top, rises through it, or at the bottom, rises up to the top, has a chimney effect, grabs all the heat, pours over a little waterfall spill, and then gets taken out, and you can do a lot of things with the heat, right? You can, I've got some heat recapture projects where we're actually warming water in Sweden and Norway. There's a number, you can use it to warm homes with radiant flooring, grow houses, things like that, right? So there's a lot of amazing applications. When you look for those sorts of opportunities from this new infrastructure, you can basically get paid to mine Bitcoin, right? Like, so for example, in Norway, the project I'm working on is we're sending the dielectric fluid, the hydrocarbon dielectric fluid, through a heat exchanger and warming the water about 5 to 6 degrees Celsius. Well, we sell that water back at a small profit over our electric cost. So if it's like 3 cents per kilowatt hour, we sell it back at like 3.3 cents, essentially, right? So we're creating that heat by mining Bitcoin in immersion cooling. So someone asked me, it's like, well, what's your power cost? I'm like, it's negative. It's negative 10%. And they say, well, what does that mean? I said, well, what that means is the people I pay and the payback on the infrastructure gets paid back through that little 0.3 cents. That's all covered, which means if we want to, we could hodl 100% of the Bitcoin, right? When you find those kind of cheat codes, right, and those opportunities to put Bitcoin in the middle of these inefficiencies, right, the ability to secure the network just gets that much better. The hash rate you can send, it just gets that much better. Justin, you had something you're going to?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to kind of build on what both you and Gerald said. Because I think it's important for this group in here to hear. Gerald mentioned prices going up, and we do have an old grid, but I'd say that right now what we're predominantly facing, certainly in places like California, probably even Texas, but North Carolina, just you can look at the list of states with the highest amount of solar that's been installed over the last decade, and see what's going on with their prices, see what's going on with their reliability, and what he didn't mention with North Carolina or Duke proposing to raise their rates an astronomical amount is because they need to build an actual power plant, not this solar. They've spent a decade and a half, 2 decades building out energy generation that has zero capacity factor. Like if all the solar on the grid in the US disappeared tonight at midnight, nothing would happen. Maybe there's some minor areas where the system has actually come to rely on the arbitrary, intermittent, unreliable generation of solar. but I can't think of one. And so I think that Bitcoin hopefully can fix this. It does help, like you said. I mean, and we're seeing now, I'm sure most of you have heard about negative pricing. You've kind of found a very savvy engineering solution to get negative pricing for hashing your miners. But we know about the insane market dynamics in California and Texas, all up the wind belt. You have negative real-time wholesale prices for electricity because these generators are producing electricity when no one needs it. And that actually is also a reliability concern. It puts stress on natural gas generation. It puts stress on nuclear generation. You mentioned them ramping up and ramping down. They don't like to do that. They can do that, but they don't want to do that. And so, Bitcoin mining is now eating those inefficiencies in the market. But I would just encourage people to maybe think more deeply about what are these inefficiencies actually representing, and it's kind of like negative interest rates, right? When they had negative interest rates in Europe and in the bond markets or what have you, and Saylor said it's kind of like time traveling. It's impossible. Like, it makes no sense when it comes to first principles in physics. Well, I would argue that's a very similar concept to negative electricity prices. Like, it should be an alarm bell telling you that, like, the system you've engineered that is generating this electricity for the customers is not sound when it comes to physics. And so I'm looking forward, like I said, to nuclear really getting its foothold. I think that is the only real solution of abundance that is available to us today. And paired with Bitcoin mining, it's fantastic. And then we don't need to take up 5 acres per megawatt for solar. We don't need to ruin the view with wind turbines. We can all admit that they actually don't look that great, right? Like, we might think we're supposed to say that it looks great, but it doesn't. So, all right, I'm done.
Okay. Well, so let me take it another direction then, too, right? So until nuclear becomes, generally accepted, readily available, all that kind of, that direction. Let's talk about just for a second what is happening in, we're based in the US, right? So we focus on our day-to-day and what we deal with there, right? Let's talk a little bit more about what is happening in, some of these other countries, right? Like, what can happen in El Salvador? Right? Like, what some options are. Justin's working on some cool stuff. Want to delve in a little bit more on, in Africa, and because I think there's some interesting points there. But so there's some technologies that have been out there forever. Biodigestion is one of them. I'm very passionate on this project, taking waste, biological waste, whatever kind it is, and actually using it to generate, putting it through a biodigester where it generates methane, right? So as it decomposes anaerobically, there's no air, there's no sunlight. The gas is created and then captured either in like a balloon or some sort of container. And then as it pressurizes, we can actually use that, right? So there's a company I'm working with in Kentucky that is using the waste from bourbon. So when you distill bourbon, there's a lot of waste. It's like a sour mash for whiskey, but you can't reuse it in bourbon. So it was becoming a waste problem. Well, this gentleman figured out how to not just turn it into methane, but also pull other revenue streams out of it, like a xylose, a type of sugar. And some of these companies are putting it in their airline jet fuel, right, to green up their jet fuel, right, that sort of thing. So it's like there's a lot of opportunities there with biodigestion, right? I feel like, any place at all that has plant waste or is increasing crops or is starting to or animal waste, was it Stacy was talking about bringing in, was it Kobe? Wagyu beef, right? Whatever. Wagyu, yeah. So it's like you have these opportunities, and Bitcoin miners, in a crazy way, are going and finding these opportunities and finding energy that would normally just disappear, right? So talk a little bit about, because from an infrastructure standpoint, what I find amazing about what's happening in Africa is there's a secondary market now for these Bitcoin miners that normally would not be profitable at all, right?
Sure. Yep, absolutely right. So when these folks are building dams and we're bringing engineers over to impoverished countries and we're building a generation asset, we have to have Bitcoin miners as well. So the secondary market, usually what happens is once we get to a halving or the difficulty gets too high, older generation miners are no longer profitable and they become e-waste. Some of us properly recycle them, some don't, some get sold and they go to areas where electricity is very cheap, Venezuela, or now in the case where we've built these assets for folks, you've got Kenya and Ethiopia, where we're sending these older gen miners that would have been discarded now have a second life because the energy created at the base cost of zero, they can mine, create Bitcoin while they're providing energy for folks. So, I mean, when you're talking about companies that make 30 to 50,000 units a month, and the United States is now the mining capital of the world, mostly Texas, that's a tremendous amount of servers. It's hard to even fathom what that looks like. If you've ever done a deployment, a large scale deployment, you get like 25 units on a pallet. So imagine 50,000 units, right? Yeah. How many pallets of miners that is? It would have been e-waste, wound up in landfills, now goes for a second life, helping create prosperity in other countries.
We've also got guys that are definitely a reason for applause on that one. We've also got like people repurposing them for, heaters and things like that. I mean, it's like, even if it doesn't make sense financially, you're not going to profit. If you have a need for the heat or you can use it for something else, why would you not? You're going to get a rebate on your electricity right at that point. So
hey, real quick. So I know we're on the clock.
I got you.
We've got a full house, which is awesome. Thank you guys all for coming to see us.
Thank you, everybody.
Can we take some time and engage? If these guys want to be here, let's see what they want to hear.
Absolutely. We got about 8:39, 38. No, I'm sorry. Left. Do we have any questions? Yeah,
I got a question.
Yep.
So Ocean Pool seems to be like one of the only pools majorly innovating in the space, but it doesn't seem to be getting a large amount of adoption from corporate miners. Do you guys know why? Do you guys mine with Ocean? And if not, why not? And why aren't they getting more hash rate? Why are they stuck at the 1 exahash mark?
You want us to answer that before you do, Luke? Or do you want to go?
Sure.
Okay. I have some hash rate going, right?
How much?
How much Bitcoin do you have?
No, percentage. Percentage. You give me percentage.
No. I'm not even going to tell you a percentage. But I do mine multiple pools, right? And some of that is actually just kind of testing things out, seeing how it works, right? But I think, honestly, the bulk of it is education. I think there was a knee-jerk response from the miners when they said, oh, you're censoring. It's like, well, you're not really censoring. You're just giving them choices, right? Like, if I still want to, allow ordinal transactions, CoinJoin, whatever, I can do that and still use their pool. It's not that big a deal. Also, most of the pools out there are KYC, know your customer, right? Because they are American-based companies and all that stuff. I don't even need an email address. I really just need a wallet address and I can start mining on Ocean, right? So there's a lot of different reasons for that. I feel like there was a knee-jerk because Bitcoiners are fighters, especially miners, because sometimes those margins are razor thin. Sometimes we have to leverage to get started. We're literally, so there's a group in Houston calls themselves Digital Wildcatters, right? They do they're basically a hub kind of, if you will, for energy in Texas, meeting former energy and power guys, meeting Bitcoiners, right? This is literally what that is, right? Like the way the Wildcatters were in Texas, going to find oil, risking their lives, digging for this stuff, right? It's the same thing that these miners are doing, right? And even though we're like, oh, it's been around forever, it's 15, 16 years, not, it's not really that long a time. Especially so it's still very new. There's a lot of very tough individuals in this industry, and everyone thinks they know best. But I think that's really it. I think ultimately, the more choice you have, period, the more decentralized it is, the better for miners. But I think that was just a knee jerk. I think eventually everything will level out, and the market's going to decide where it wants to go.
Yeah, I think I agree. There was somewhat of a knee jerk reaction, and a lot of naysayers arguing that by not mining the spam, miners were going to make less. I think as the months have gone on and people see miners have been making more on Ocean than with the other pools, I think a lot of the FUD will be refuted that way.
Yeah.
But also the bigger miners, they have more bureaucracy to even consider changing pools. And that's been a big slowdown in that regard. And the fact that we're so small still, we don't even find a block every day at this point. A lot of miners apparently need to pay their shareholders in one way or another,
Or their power bill or whatever.
right? They have to pay it every day in a lot of cases, really more than I would have expected. And so by not finding a block every day, they can't really do that. So Ocean isn't really viable to those people yet. We need to get up to 1%. And then I think it would become a lot more practical.
I think it's also a motivation, though, to find a weird source of electricity or of power that's usually overlooked. It's more motivation for that as well.
Dave, I'm just going to say, so we host miners at our sites in Ohio, and I don't think any one of our clients are using Ocean at our site. But I know that we have, those same clients have sites elsewhere, and they are. And I think one of the reasons you were kind of touching on it, Dave, is that, we're fully integrated into the grid, so we can get demand response signals from the grid at any time. We're probably not going to have them at this time of year, but in the summer, on a hot day, we can get notice right away that we're getting curtailed. And then obviously our clients get a beneficial electric rate because of their willingness to automatically curtail at a moment's notice. And I'd be curious, maybe off stage, Luke, get your thoughts on this, but I can see maybe a big risk for a large miner that's hashing for a week or a couple days, and there's no blocks, and then they're curtailed for an 8-hour window because of our relationship with the utility and the operators, and then that's when Ocean
they
hits
get a
the block.
Yeah.
The way we've designed the reward system, which we've called tides, it actually smooths it all out over 8 blocks worth of work. So even if you're not mining when we find the block, you're still going to get the reward that you've already earned.
But 8 blocks, is that 80 minutes?
No.
You've already put in work units, so you're going to get credit for the work units regardless.
You're putting the work in the 8 block. Yeah.
So now we find maybe a block every 3 days on average. Eight of our blocks would take 8 times 3
So like
days.
a month.
All right, so and this is the education that I think Duke
Any other questions?
mentioned.
Yes. Hi, Christine.
You talked about a lot of different. Do you have any experience
so that the people in the back can.
Do any of you have any knowledge about how it's going in El Salvador with the volcano mining and any updates on that, or even just an explanation for what they're doing here with mining?
Sure. So I'll grab that one. So it's a multi-year project. I think we've got slightly over 10 meg running already. And the intent is to have another 74 megawatts of geothermal, wind, and solar blend online by Q4 this year, with a short-term goal of, I think it's and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's 210 meg. And then the long-range goals are, of course, sky's the limits. I've heard everything up to a gigawatt of mining here in El Salvador, which would be amazing. So hopefully, fingers crossed, 74 to 75 meg by the end of this year.
It's a good number, especially for a sovereign country mining. That's a great number.
New all-time high.
Yeah. What else? Any other questions?
Hey guys, as a part owner of the network, I just wanted to say thank you for securing our generational wealth here. It's a very important thing you guys are doing. I had a question though for Luke, and it relates to mining, and it's around the ordinals.
We're not allowed to talk about that.
That's why I have the question for Luke.
No, we're not allowed to talk about that. No, we are. That's fine. Go ahead.
Because we were talking on Twitter, it was an issue, a few months ago. Do you feel that it's still an issue? Is it still a threat? Do the miners have a part to play? Is it something we can ignore? Where do we stand on ordinals right now in the ecosystem?
Ordinals, like most spam attacks, are not a big issue unless people don't do anything about it. As long as people actually try to mitigate it, it's a non-issue, really. The problem is that people have this time around been essentially tricked into doing nothing and letting this attack continue and grow and grow. Satoshi designed the system so that miners play a role in spam filtering. Miners decide what transactions go into the block and are supposed to discard stuff that isn't a real transaction at all. And that's necessarily part of the design, because if you design it in the consensus rules that every node enforces, the spammers will just find a different way to bypass that. If they weren't bypassing it, they wouldn't be, their transactions wouldn't be transactions in the first place. It's just a raw JPEG, every node rejects it already. So if it was in the consensus rules, they would just find another way around it. So it has to be something that where the miners are able to adapt as the spam attack adapts.
Right. Well, we're running out of time here. We've got, I think, 5 seconds on the board real quick. So thanks, Justin. I appreciate that. All right. So real quick, say real quick, just what's the best way to follow you? Twitter, how to find you. Justin is, what are you? J Orkney 5? Did I get that right? At J Orkney 5. Oh, hey, look at that. I'm not paying attention. I'm doing my job and talking to you guys. Hi.
About solar.
All right. So thanks everybody very much. Feel free to grab us at the end if you want to have any other questions. Love to talk about it. All right. Thank you.
Thank you all.